know what it is like to marry up.
Oh yeah, yeah, right here, yeah.
You know what it's like?
I know.
Good to see you. I think he's right in this case. I think you're right here, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how I feel, and just so grateful for Tricia. And as every year passes, I'm more grateful I made the decision I did. Honored to be with you. Honored to have Mamita with us, Abuela. And thanks for coming, you and Ray. And great to see some of you familiar faces again. Yeah, we are back. I thought we would first start by just thanking you for praying for us. We feel so incredibly blessed and so grateful for the way that so many people prayed us through this last year, which was an unexpected journey for our family. I guess most of you probably would be aware that our son had a stroke. I'll share a bit of that story here in a moment, but just let's begin by saying thank you. We have felt carried by people all over the world. We've heard from people we've never met, churches that we've never done anything to deserve the grace that's been shown us through prayer and through encouragement. And we really feel like it carried us through, certainly the hardest thing we've ever gone through yet in our lives. So, we were, you may know this, I met Tricia at the Bible College in Pennsylvania at the University of Valley Forge, was preparing to go into ministry, and loved her dad and the heritage she came from, and interned here at New Life Assembly of God for a summer when I was preparing for years in ministry. Some of you would remember that, and we were married right here on this stage, and this is just holds a lot of special heritage in our hearts. And then we spent some years in ministry at the University of Valley Forge, where Tricia finished her degree in elementary education, and then we ended up being called to pastor a church in the DC area, a really weird church. Have you ever heard of Mennonites?
Yeah.
So we were invited to pastor a Mennonite charismatic international church. So we called it Mennocostal. I grew up AG, but was pastoring and leading an Anabaptist, not anti-Baptist, but Anabaptist church, which is the stream, the religious stream that Mennonites would come flowing out of, along with Quaker and Brethren and Amish a bit as well, but many years ago. And so it was a wonderful leadership experience for us. And we grew, we loved our congregation, they loved us, and they were gracious to us as young leaders who made many mistakes, but they loved us, and we loved them. And then the Lord began to move in our hearts and called us to ministry in Africa, where we spent the last 7 years. So we were kind of 7 years in preparation for ministry at the college, 7 years leading a church in the DC area, and 7 years in Africa. So God has worked in sevens for us. So I guess we're in for the beginning of our next 7-year journey here. And so that's a bit of our story through that time. We had a couple kids, as you can see. And in our years in Africa, we were doing more and more training of leaders around areas of church planting, discipleship, mission. And through each progressive step that we would take, I would realize more and more my sense of call to just coach and develop leaders. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5 says this: "The heart of a man or a woman is like a deep well. One who has insight will draw it out." And that has just been a theme verse for my life, to work with leaders and to draw them out, particularly the stuff that leaders don't want to deal with or face to be healthy. And so that's been a lot of my passion over the years. And so we were doing that. We took a step deeper into Africa, if I can say it that way, when we left South Africa, where we were directing a church planting school and mobilizing primarily Western leaders to places all over the world. So we were leading this church planting school, but people were coming to us from America, Europe, Australia, Canada, and we were preparing them to go out on missions while I was being mentored by a world-class missions leader named Floyd McClung in his 70s who had mobilized thousands of leaders for missions. And he was mentoring me personally, which was a gift from God, and we were leading this school, and as we were, I was more and more desiring to actually be a real missionary. Because we were quickly training others to do what we ourselves had not yet done. And so we felt this sense of, man, we actually feel like we skipped a step. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so we ended up in Tanzania, and that's really how that happened. And so we ended up in Arusha, Tanzania, northern Tanzania, where we knew no one. So we say that God and Google called us to Tanzania. God called us to the region, and Google helped us choose where to live. We knew that East Africa was the place that the Lord was asking us to go, and had a sense of freedom as to where. And we had just a list, and we said this is how we kind of thinking through what we're hoping this next season looks like. And that included language learning and living among people and learning to love people different than we were. And so we wanted to feel what it felt like to suffer. You know a lot about this through your years in missions. And so we just felt like, man, we need that. We need the stuff that gets built into you when you are an oddball in a context and you're suffering to even communicate. And we wanted to learn those lessons. And so we ended up in Tanzania. And that's where we began to make friends like Agnes and many, many, many others. And so we were going for it. We were about a year in, 11 and a half months into our stay. We were with you just before we left, as you recall, almost 2 years ago. And things were taking off. In fact, more was happening than we were even publicizing, because we felt a bit uncomfortable to share publicly the amount of favor we were experiencing, because we thought maybe it would be confusing or misleading, and so we just didn't. But we had seen a lot of God's favor. We had actually opened up a 9-bedroom guest house right next to our property, where we begin to bring leaders in from around the world and from around Tanzania, and just impart into them and coach them and help them to be healthy. And it was a blast. We were having a lot of fun, and we were feeling a lot of God's grace in what we were doing in our work. And nimejifunza Kiswahili, napenda wa Tanzania kabisa. I'd learned Swahili just in a short 11 months. We had really given ourselves to learn Swahili. Everybody say, Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Just looked at me like I was crazy. I just said, praise the Lord. And so we had learned Swahili, had made great friends, and it was going so well. And on May 21st, our little Grayson woke up from a nap, and he had been fighting a cold for 3 days. And he woke up from his nap, and he went walking across the living room floor, and he fell straight forward onto his face in a very odd way. And we knew that something was wrong. And after a little while, we ended up taking him to a hospital. Now, don't picture the hospital here in Albany. It's very different. And so we didn't have the medical care that we would be used to here in the U.S., and we were able to get him seen, and not sure here, but maybe just watch him overnight, and let's see how he does, and maybe in the morning, if he's no better, you come back. And through the night, we observed him and realized that he wasn't even able to turn over in his crib, and he really lost all function on the one side of his body. And by 5 o'clock the next morning, we knew that it was urgent that we would get him back to the hospital, and we did. And when the doctor re-examined him, he thought perhaps there was some type of swelling on his brain. And mind you, we were in our city. We don't have MRI machines. We don't have CAT scan machines. We didn't have the capacity to be able to actually know what's going on with Grayson. And so it was obviously one of the scariest moments of our life when the doctor informed us that Grayson would need to be medically evacuated quickly on an airplane to get him out, to get him to where he could be treated. God is calling us. And so we were then able to do that. He was flown to Nairobi, Kenya. I was actually on a trip. I had to meet Trish and Grayson in Nairobi. So when our kids, Davis and Lily, left for school that morning, they came home and their mom, their dad, and their brother were in another country. And so that was just one of those realities. Can you imagine your kids come home and you and one of your other kids is in another nation? And that is exactly how it was. But the Lord had gone before us, and we had a older mama and papa a couple in their 50s that joined our team, and they'd become like grandparents to the kids, and they loved us, and they were a huge part of our lives. They lived on our compound in a little 2-bedroom cottage, and so they were there to shepherd the kids when they got home from school and to walk with them for the following 5 days as we had Grayson looked at in Nairobi. And it took us actually about 2.5, 3 days to learn that Grayson had had a stroke. And we didn't know 18-month-olds could have strokes. My grandfather had a stroke when I was 13 years old, and I just always picture strokes were something that happened to people that are older. We didn't know kids could have strokes. And so it was the last thing we were expecting to hear. Even the medical care in Nairobi was not up to par enough, and we actually learned that Grayson had a stroke through a nurse at the Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., as she looked at his examination and his CAT scan and his MRI and then told me, Noah, your son's had a stroke. They were using other language or words, and we didn't even know that's what he'd had. So it was a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster for us as we waited to try to then get him out again back to the United States. And so we just had to take it a minute at a time. We literally didn't have enough strength or grace or discernment to go further than a couple minutes at a time. What do you do with your kids? How do we get them across the border? Will Grayson ever walk again? What do we do with our home? What about all these people that have bought flights to fly in and see us? And what do you do? And what do you do with, and so obviously Grayson was our number one priority, but so we just walked it out day by day and ended up getting Grayson stabilized enough. We were considering flying him back on a medical plane. Our insurance would have covered it if he was in a critical enough state. We weren't sure if his state was critical enough. The longer we looked into it, the more we hoped that he could actually fly Delta and not fly on a medical plane. It's $127,000 to fly your child from Nairobi, Kenya to Washington, D.C. On a private air ambulance in case you ever need to do it. And so we didn't want to do that if we could avoid it. And so we fought through and we got Grayson stable enough that we could get him released from the hospital 11 o'clock in the morning. And we were at the airport at 7 and on an 11 o'clock flight out of Nairobi. It was quite a scene. It was one of these, keep the galls hidden from the IV, and kids, don't you say a word about a stroke. We got this boy to America because we probably shouldn't have been on the flight that soon after being released from the hospital. But what an adventure, and we ended up landing back here on the 29th of May, and Grayson was admitted, went from airport to hospital, was admitted to the Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore, where we spent the following 30 days, babe, at Johns Hopkins and the Kennedy Krieger Institute in downtown Baltimore. Our family lived at the Ronald McDonald House. Have you heard about these?
Yeah.
You only hear about them and you want to donate to them when you're at McDonald's, and you never imagine you'd be sleeping in one day. And we were, and it was an incredible experience. Wow. The compassion that grows in your heart for what other families are going through. We quickly realized what we had on our hands was a lot to be grateful for. Being around the kids that we were around there at the Ronald McDonald House and seeing what we saw at the Kennedy Krieger Rehab Center that our son was at, we realized, Lord, you have rescued him. You have saved him. And you may have followed our journey online and learned that 30 days to the day after Grayson's stroke, he walked again.
Lord.
Praise the Lord. And we knew we were seeing many miracles at the same time. Miracles of God's healing, along with miracles of God's creation. I mean, He made our brains to everything thought through, to the details of how neuroplasticity works and how one part of your brain can be damaged and another part then can take on a job it was never intended to do. God's design is incredible, and His goodness through how He's made us is a gift to us. In fact, there's miracles happening in all of our bodies all the time because of God's brilliant design that we miss. And we misidentify things. We don't know that we've just seen a miracle, but we have. And so we just started counting miracles in Grayson's life. And so anyway, we were loved on incredibly and prayed for, and actually we felt embarrassed sometimes. Like we wish we could take some of the love and grace we were experiencing and like share it out to others that we were with in this journey. And so anyway, then we... What we've seen ever since is just a slow progression of medical testing and workup in his body to find out why did he have a stroke. That's the question everybody wants to know. And the very beginning of the journey, they said, you don't ever want to know why. And we thought, well, isn't that interesting? And they said, well, if you know why, it usually means you found a problem that could cause another stroke. And so they said you almost want it to be a fluke stroke without a real answer for why it happened. Because it means you didn't find any other problem that you could tell you it's going to happen again. Does that make sense? And so to this day, we don't have any answer for why Grayson had a stroke. We've chased down a number of medical concerns, and they're scary looking, and then we kind of go down the road and dead end. Everything's fine. And then high cholesterol, we go down the end, everything's fine. And then curvy artery, carotid artery to the brain. Uh-oh, we might have a vascular disease. Check the whole vascular system of the body. Dead end. Everything's fine. The only curved artery is in his neck. Or the connective tissue disorder. We think he might have one of these connective tissue disorders. Testing. He's clean. No connective tissue disorder. So the final thing we're waiting on now in the next couple of weeks will be results from a full panel genetic test. They're saying, well, if it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, maybe it's a genetic disorder that is causing all of these things to materialize. And so they've ordered a very extensive and expensive full panel genetic test on Grayson, which includes Trish and I having to have genetic tests, and we'll wait on those results within the next number of weeks. And so just, we kind of believe in our heart that that's going to come back clean too. And so we just kind of think there's more going on here.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something else going on. And it's something in Grayson's life and our family's life and the ministry the Lord has for us. I don't know what it is. But you just kind of have to come to a place where, Lord, there's more going on here than I can see. And I don't need to understand it all. And we don't need to understand it all. And so we're just grateful. The guy is all over the place. Can you see him? I mean, he doesn't look like a kid that had a stroke 7 months ago.
Yeah.
Does he? And he hides it well. He's got some issues for sure with the use of his leg and his hand and his chewing and other things. But we're so grateful. There are so many reasons to be glad and to see how the Lord's worked. And so, thank you. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for your prayers through this journey. And maybe when we close today, well, I'll just tell you now so I don't have to do it at the end of the talk, the sermon I want to give you, but is that now we're back. And we really feel like there's this double loss, right? There's the loss of the health of your son and then the loss of a vision or a dream that you had in your heart for ministry. And so that double loss was what made it so difficult for us. Because we weren't done in Africa. We weren't done. And we were just getting going, and you don't learn a foreign language to turn around and leave. You know what I mean? You don't start the kind of work we were to then have to abandon it. And so that was another tough blow. And so finally in October, November, we realized we can't go back because there just is too many medical concerns with Grayson that he wouldn't have the therapy or the medical care he needs. He'll need regular MRIs of his brain. He'll need regular appointments with the pediatric stroke specialist. He'll need stuff. And we'd have to have been flying back probably every 6 months, and that would have become really cumbersome on our family. And so we had to make the difficult call to relocate back here to the United States. after 7 good years in Africa. We were hoping to cross over the 10-year line and then maybe come back, but here we are now. And so we've, as I say, we've cried it out, and we'll cry more if we need to. One of the important parts of grieving is to let it out. It's either going to come out through tears and verbal processing and sharing your pain, or it'll come out through anger and bitterness and hurt. And so we just believe in getting out the hurtful stuff through tears and through processing with our words what we feel. And so we've done that as faithfully as we know how. In December, flew over to Tanzania and packed our house, put everything in a big metal box and put it on a boat. And it's out in the middle of the ocean, and our things will arrive in Baltimore, Maryland in about 8 days. And so we will have memories of our years in Africa because we brought our bed and our dining room table and all that stuff. You'd either have to buy it here or pay to ship it, so we shipped it. So we're looking forward to that, and we're settling in back into the DC area. And so anyway, we're looking forward to what's next. Trisha's teaching. She's been a teacher, and she's back in the classroom. And I am pioneering a leadership network. And so I just would love the chance to share more about that with any of you who are interested. But for a long time, as I mentioned earlier, I've loved coaching leaders, and particularly love coaching leaders into issues of authenticity and wholeness. And so I've pioneered, just in the last 2 months, a leadership network called Integer Network, which is a network that will focus on coaching leaders and teams into authenticity and wholeness. And so I'll just kind of formalize what I've already been doing. I really struggle with fake Christian stuff. So I just very